Hello, everyone. My name is Adrian Markish, and I am the publisher and editor of ModernAnalyst.com, the premier online community for business analysts. I would like to welcome you to today's webinar titled BA Best Practices, Reporting Requirements, Design, Creation, and Distribution. Today's featured speaker is Amit Parikh, Manager of Systems Consultants with Quest Software. The webinar would last approximately 60 minutes, including a Q&A session. So make sure to submit your questions in advance using the questions feature of the webinar software. I would also like to say thank you to Quest Software for sponsoring this event. At this time, I will turn it over to Amit to get us started.
Thank you, Adrian. Hello, folks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Amit, as mentioned. I'm the Manager of Systems Consulting here at Quest Software. And it is a pleasure to speak to all of you guys. This presentation, as mentioned, is titled BA Best Practices, Reporting Requirements, Design, Creation, and Distribution. It's actually a pleasure to speak to you folks, the business analyst community. What I've done for this presentation is do a little bit of research, a little bit of surveying in the business analyst field to determine some best practices, perhaps best practices that can be incorporated into your workflows, given the times where you need to gather requirements and move your way into the workflow of developing reports for those constituents. This presentation, as I mentioned, sorry about that. This presentation, as mentioned, will last about an hour, and the format of this presentation is going to be such. Let me go ahead and give you guys an agenda. What we'll do first is we'll walk through some best practices. I'll talk you through what I feel are best practices in the different stages of a reporting lifecycle. What we'll then do is move into talking about some challenges. I actually have a polling question for you guys about maybe, I would say 60% through this webinar, so look forward to that. And then towards the tail end of this webinar, we're actually going to look at a solution from Quest Software, Toad for Data Analysts, and how it can be used to solve some of the challenges that business analysts face when they're dealing with reporting tasks. And then we'll summarize some of the benefits of the solution and then open up the forum for some questions and answers. Speaking specific to the agenda, what I wanted to do was sort of break apart the life cycle that a business analyst goes through. And in my own research and findings, I found that a big component of an analyst's time is spent obviously gathering stakeholder requirements. So we're going to talk about what's involved there and where best practices can be incorporated. What we'll also talk about is formatting or making the report as easy to read or easy to comprehend as possible. So in this section, we'll also talk about conditional formatting and what I feel are some best practices in using conditional formatting when designing reports. We also have a section on templates and reusability. There are a number of ways to do reporting for the business user, but ultimately there are some common denominators. There are components, elements, attributes that can be reused to improve the efficiency of your reporting task. So we'll talk about that. Query building obviously is the essence of reporting. You've got to extract this data from some source, and typically you're using an SQL or an SQL script or an SQL query to gather that data. So mining the data for the right information and being able to correlate that data so you have the right data set is important, but there are some best practices that can be looked at here, some things to avoid. We'll talk about some of the conventional things that I think you should avoid or you should perhaps incorporate when performing query building tasks. And then we'll move off into functional considerations. Obviously the report has to do something for that end user. It should be flexible. It should be feature-rich. However, it shouldn't be overbearing. So we'll talk about the functional considerations that go into a report. How much control do you want to give your user? How much options do you want to give them in the setup of that report? And then moving on to information design, this is where we'll actually look at how the information can be laid out. So this is not so much the data design. This is actually going to be the design of the information as it appears on the report. So we'll talk about some of the things that you can incorporate there in terms of best practices. And I guess navigating the report goes hand in hand with information design. So once the report's been published, what's the most effective ways for users to navigate that information? We'll talk about that. Finally, we'll move into distribution. getting the reports out to those constituents, those business users. There are several methods that we can explore, and we'll talk about some of the best practices that you can incorporate there. You're going to hear me say best practices a lot through this presentation, so be prepared. This is where we shift gears, and we'll state some challenges that business analysts go through, or what I've found from my bit of surveying and research. We'll take a quick poll, and then we'll go through a demonstration. I would say it's more of a series of vignettes that show you how for data analysts, a solution from Quest software for querying and reporting can be used to improve some of those reporting tasks or aspects of the reporting workflow. And we'll move into summary and benefits, and I promise we'll save somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes for some Q&A towards the tail end. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on. First thing I'd like to talk about is the stakeholder requirements itself. So as you can see here, conducting a thorough analysis of user questions and scenarios that the business wants to explore in decision making is of utmost importance. A thorough, well-executed user scenario will enable you to create a report that responds to the needs of your user and the processes in question. So to create a solid user scenario, the analyst must follow or answer these particular questions for the business, or at least answer these questions before they get into this engagement. For instance, who's going to be using the report? Is it a business decision maker? Is it someone at the executive level? Or perhaps this is someone with a more specialized role in the company. Maybe this is someone in IT, or perhaps someone in finance. So understanding the role of that user, that business user, and ensuring that the report supplies information that's relevant to them is key. For example, IT managers are more interested in total uptime, whereas a junior administrator may want information that helps them troubleshoot. Now, you can think about that in terms of other organizations or other departments. Some folks may want high-level information. Some folks want more granular or more detailed information. You're going to have to appropriate. Will the user actually read the report thoroughly, or will they just simply scan it? That actually sounds weird, but it's actually a true occurrence. Is the user actually going to just look for certain things in the report, or are they going to read it thoroughly? So for reports that are scanned by the user, if you anticipate someone scanning them, keep them short and focused. For the reports that are intended to be thoroughly read, enable the business user, to easily display additional rich detail, explanations, graphics. And also, there should be some allowance for users to customize what goes into the report. A good summary focus and some provision for highlights throughout the report is always a good thing. And I think while you're in this mode of gathering requirements, even though we're not at the stage of distribution, it's important to know how the business users intend to distribute this report and how they intend to receive this report. So that's going to help you later on in crafting that particular phase, or some other group may be involved in that. Lastly, on this particular slide, emphasizing the most important information makes end users more efficient, because they don't have to search for the information they need. So again, I'm going to say that emphasizing the information will raise the chances that it will be seen. You know, having this emphasis on key information that is most relevant to the users helps you address the top questions and concerns that that business may have. And there are a couple of other things I could say here. For instance, and this may go into formatting, so perhaps we'll take a look at this later, but you know, calling attention to certain data points in your report. An example of this would be in the use of an executive summary. So keeping an executive summary or a section at the beginning of the report will call attention to certain important details that you may be trying to get across that's addressing those questions or challenges. So again, one thing that's important here is keeping the lines of communication open, and also understanding what type of look and feel the stakeholder wants. So are they consistently receiving a certain type of report, a certain type of display, whether it's graphical, tabular in nature, perhaps there's something in between. That definitely should be vetted early on, so that can be taken care of throughout the process. Let's go and move on to the next slide. This next section is involved with formatting. Now, some may say that formatting comes a little bit later on in the process, but as I discussed earlier, for me, knowing the format in which the stakeholder desires is going to be key in your development of this report. So ensuring that the report is structured for easy reading is going to be an important objective for the report or for the business analyst. The report should be structured so that useful information can be read easily at a glance. The report should then allow users to easily access more detailed information. So as I said earlier, providing any executive summaries at the beginning of the report is going to be useful. Completeness is key, ensuring that the report is complete so the user doesn't have to go elsewhere to find more information. So there's this trade-off that occurs between being complete and having too much. We'll talk about that later on in this presentation. Keep the report as flat as possible. Now, I know that there are a lot of drill downs and there are a lot of nested functionality that can happen in reports, but it's important not to make users navigate a complex structure to get to their data. So summary data can link to more detailed or aggregated information, but that information should, so for the most part, be on the same page or on a peer page rather than on a page that's deeper. And ensuring that the report allows for quick scanning, I know I said this earlier, is going to be important because that just highlights and it marquees that important information. A quick note here about conditional formatting. You've probably seen this in a few tools that you guys have used. It's available in the solution I'm going to show you today, where a color can change depending on a condition in the data. So a lot of reporting tools have this. You'll find this in Access, you'll find this in Excel, you'll find this in Crystal, in a lot of query tools out there, namely Toad for Data Analysts. So with regards to conditional formatting, it's useful to highlight certain parts of a report when particular conditions are met. An example of this is, like I said earlier, you can change the color of value to red when a value is greater than 5,000. So most reporting solutions will provide two ways of adding conditional formatting to your report. These are pretty conventional around the board. One way is more wizard-driven. Your conditional formatting, you may see it's called formatting exceptions, will allow you to control multiple conditions and formatting attributes, so like font, text color, border, fill color, for a specific layout of an object. So in this particular case, you're using the wizard, but you're not really having to write any code to propagate this condition. So that's more of the general type. I'll demonstrate this a little bit later today in the TDA report builder. But the point is that there are options in reporting tools that allow you to do this without much custom scripting. On the flip side, there are format triggers available. And this property allows you to code your own functions to perform conditional formatting. So because you write the code yourself, you have more flexibility and control when compared to using conditional formatting or perhaps a format exception wizard. For most conditions, you can often get what you need with conditional formatting or the format exception wizards. But again, the format triggers, the things that you may code in with specialties, may give you that added functionality or that added benefit. So a couple of things here, and you'll see in this little diagram or this picture I have over on the left, not only were certain fields of the data or certain data points conditionally highlighted, but you'll also notice that there were bookmarks set over on the left-hand side that link to minimum and maximum values. So again, this is just an example of key specific information points that are easily accessible and then putting highlight on certain conditional data. All right, let's go ahead and move to the next slide. Another best practice that I feel that, or another area where I feel best practices can be incorporated is with templates and reusability. Now you'll see here that there are a lot of things, there are a lot of common denominators, there are a lot of reusable pieces that appear in a report. It could be the style, it could be format attributes, it could be the type of guidelines that you use for display, like watermarking, branding, export formats, things of that nature. So you should have a supply, as a business analyst, you should have a supply of easily accessible default reports that address the business's top questions or concerns. So as an analyst begins to gain more traction and experience with their constituents, the one thing will happen is that there will be some patterns that emerge. There will be some consistent deliverables that will emerge. So ensuring that this information in the report or these templates that are targeted towards correct user scenarios or questions that consistently come up is going to be a best practice. So identify and prioritize those top questions that the report should answer, or identify and prioritize the top reports that are commonly asked for. Surveying is going to be a good technique in this particular case because when you talk with your user community, you'll perhaps get a survey that will indicate to you what is most popular, what is most consistent, what is most sought after. For example, a recent survey of large and enterprise IT organizations found that the following types of reports are considered most important: availability of the systems, system and network status or health, performance. Now you can think when you apply this to sales, or you apply this to the world of finance, or you apply this to the world of science, there's going to be a number of what we called most important or top considerations for these organizations. So having those in a default format may speed your time to getting that information back to them. So supplying the reports that your users use most frequently is going to be important in this case. And that's all I really wanted to say here. The reusable elements, I would say, and attributes would be things like style guidelines, how default attributes appear in a report, for instance, what are their characteristics. Depending on the scenario, what type of style guideline will be used. So all of these things can be modular. A lot of them are object-oriented, so they can be shared amongst different reports. Of course, you have to have the right solution in place to take advantage of that as well. Next slide. We'll talk more about functional considerations. So in this particular case, it's really important to provide powerful functionality in the report setup. So the report itself should be flexible and should be functional for that end user. Allowing users to tailor the contents of the report means that the report is going to be more useful and precise for them. Understanding the business's scenario or decision-making process so that the report setup options allow reports to be generated ultimately to meet the goals of that user. But do not provide a report setup that's so sophisticated or complicated that it becomes hard to use or hard to manage or hard to set up, for instance, core report components. Now, typically a business end user is not going to use a SQL builder, but imagine if there was some custom logic that needed to be added to a report on the fly. You want to keep those things as high level and as least complicated as possible. So again, try to keep the customizable options simple and straightforward, but still very much feature-rich. Also, it's important that users have configuration in the report, things like variables, date and time range, data source, what type of data to exclude. Also, if the end users themselves or like the business has a reporting UI, so the business analyst community may be submitting their reports to a reporting user interface. It may be on a SharePoint, it may be a web interface, there may be a number of different portals for the business community to access these reports. So ensuring that these users can locate the default reports immediately upon opening the UI is going to be very important. Giving default reports prominence in the feature or report menus is something important. And also, yeah, I mean, I talked about the report setup, but making sure that there's some type of prompt that's easy to use, a dialogue that allows them to work in a wizard-driven fashion is always preferable. So again, having that interactivity, being able to bind variables to the report that can change the nature of the data, meaning the data coming back, whether you need a subset or a specific orientation, will make that report much more flexible and useful for that user. Again, precision is key. Also, another thing to note here is what not to show in the report. Although it's tempting to set up a report that contains every piece of information available, omitting information that's not important to the user allows important information to be accessed more easily, ensuring that the report answers specific questions. Allowing the user to exclude the information they don't want is always going to be better because, again, that saves them work in the end. and ultimately it's going to be better in the database as well. And what I mean is that it's going to perform better. There's going to be less data being extracted, and again, it's more precise. So in this process, if it's not already pre-configured in the report, allow the user the chance to adjust these things based on date time range, based on selected variables, based on perhaps the selected analyses, value ranges. And of course, once the report is generated, there should be options for filtering, collapsible sections. There should be certain sections that can be ignored easily. So an example, an index allows the user to find needed items quickly. And other than that, I would say that we could probably move on into the information design. Actually, I skipped a slide there. I forgot about one of the most important tasks here when it comes to report design, and that is the query building. So before we get into the information design, let me state a couple of best practices here. Now, for those that know me, database is really near and dear to my heart. And one of the things that's important in the whole process of query building is, or the whole process of report building is the query building task. Over here on the left, this is an example of an explain plan that you can generate using Toad for Data Analysts. So this was derived off of a query that was running against an Oracle database. So most RDBMS platforms, Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, and some of these others that are out there like MySQL, they have the ability to produce an execution plan. So definitely review the explain plan or the execution plan if available to you. I know in some cases, like with that Microsoft Access, you won't get a plan. But for most mainstream RDBMS, you're going to get that feature available to you if it's provisioned in the database. But I guess my first tip when it comes to query building is whether or not to use a where clause in a select statement to narrow the number of rows returned. And this is important. The where clause is always important, not only in the use of a join, but in general. If you don't use a where clause, then the database will perform a table scan of your table. That means it's going to read every single record from that table and return all the rows. So in some cases, you may want to return all the rows and not use a where clause. But if you don't need all the rows returned, using a where clause could limit the number of rows retrieved. So DBAs are constantly looking at the performance of ad hoc queries and batch queries that are running on a transactional system. This is going to help that cause because we're introducing a best practice in query design early on. By returning the data that you don't need, you are causing the database to perform I/O, input and output, that it doesn't need to. And it's wasting database resources. It increases network traffic, which can also lead to reduced performance. And if the table is very large, a full table scan will lock the table during time-consuming scan. So what happens there? Other users are prevented from accessing it. There's a lock in place, and it hurts the concurrency of the application. Another commonly used clause or statement in SQL is the union statement. And by default, it performs the equivalent of a select distinct on the final result set. Okay? So what the union does is, in other words, it takes the results of two like record sets, combines them, and then performs a distinct in order to eliminate any duplicate rows. This process occurs even if there are no duplicate records in the final record set. So if you know that there aren't any duplicate records, and this presents a problem for your application, then by all means use the union statement to eliminate those duplicate rows. So let me say that again. If you know that there are going to be duplicate records, and if there is going to be a challenge with this, then by all means use the union statement and eliminate those duplicate rows. But if you know that there will never be any duplicate rows, so if you know that the raw data set is distinct, and this presents no problem for you or your application, then you should use the union all instead of union, the union all. And the advantage of union all is that it does not perform that select distinct at the final result set, which saves a lot of unnecessary database resources from being used. In general, you should always carefully evaluate whether you use select query, the select distinct query clause or not. Some report developers will automatically add this clause to every select statement, even when it's not necessary. This is actually a bad habit that should be reduced. Let me see here. Let me think about some of the other things we're talking about here. So we talked about the distinct. The distinct basically causes a lot of extra work on the database. You know, so we just talked about that in junction with union. Another thing that you should probably be careful of using is a select all. So, for example, if you, let me see. This is the best way to phrase it. So, if you know, for instance, that you don't need every single column in that table, why should you select all from that table? So if you know that you're only looking for, let's say, 2 out of like 10 columns in that table, it's always going to be better to select those 2 columns explicitly, as opposed to getting, you know, all the table columns out. So a select all can also be expensive when done unnecessarily. And you know what's interesting is that sometimes what happens is you'll select all from a table, but what you could probably do is maybe use, for instance, the top operator. This is one thing that I've seen used in databases, and this can limit the number of rows that are returned, even though the user doesn't enter any criteria, for instance, to direct the number of rows returned. So using the top statement will bring back the top records, let's say the top 100 or the top 50 records in that table or in that data set, and perhaps allow you to work a little bit more efficiently. So again, some areas here that can help you with SQL. I also wrote here consider the use of views and temp tables. That may be something that you discuss perhaps with your data team, because obviously those have to be provisioned in the database. But there are certain tuning techniques that will explore the use of views or temp tables as well. And again, that explain plan is going to be very helpful in understanding where the full table scans occur and all that other stuff. A couple more slides and then we'll get to the demo. I just wanted to speak to some best practices here in information design. Basically, these following basic design principles will make the report easy to read and use. Keep the report short as possible. It goes without saying. Make tables. So if you have a table that appears in your report, make the table scrollable. And now, I don't know if this is like a hard number to live by, but what I feel is show a maximum of about 15 items at a time. So if you're in a table, make it scrollable. Try to keep it 15 items or less. And when the table gets printed, considering showing the top 15 items in the main report, these should be the most important items, and then provide an optional appendix for the full data, appendix for that full data. If you're going to use online charts, keep them concise and easy to read. If users need more details, then allow them to click the graphic to open up a larger version. So like a pop-up or a drill down. Include a report title at the top of the report. I mean, that goes without saying, but I think some standard data points in the title should be author, the branding, date range of the data, your data source. Maybe data source could be optional, but you could always maybe state that logically, right? Like this is the sales database, for instance, or orders database. Date the report was produced, total number of pages. We said this earlier, but the executive summary should be the second item in the report, right after the title. There should be a paging mechanism at the top and bottom of each page. Chunks of information should be grouped together if they relate to each other. And try to minimize or eliminate horizontal scrolling in your report under standard conditions. This all sort of goes back to page sizing and layout on a page. And regarding color coding, if necessary, should be implemented, but there should be an option for alt text or text for the sake of those colorblind or visual impaired users. Navigating the report. The business analyst should provide some simple ways to analyze the data. Providing mechanisms in the report that allow users to display only the data they want means the report can be targeted to the needs of the user. So giving options or allowances for sorting the data, highest and low values so they're easily seen. It also allows potential trends to be seen in the data. Also, it could be either baselining or it could be base reporting. But it's always sometimes good to see some data point in reference with the baseline. So you can then see the delta, or you could see the rate of change. That's important. The base report should allow parameters to be easily adjustable. This goes back to the functionality considerations, but this allows the user to generate a report tailored to their concerns. And provide the ability to use views. Views can group data in predetermined, meaningful ways. Some call them dashboards, some call them views, but in the navigation of a report, being able to predetermine in a meaningful way how you want to arrange that data can always be useful. And like I said earlier, data is often meaningful when it is compared to a baseline. So allow users to easily specify a set of data with which the current data can be compared. And then for more complex data analysis, now this report that you see here on the left it's not very complex, but for more complex data analysis, ensure that your report is easily exportable to another data analysis program. So perhaps, for instance, having an Excel option or having a XML option or a comma delimited option will allow you to export that data to a format compatible with another data analysis program, which could help you with that further complexity. And if users can move around the report easily, then they can easily piece together the story that the information is telling. So clear navigation allows the user to intuitively follow a logical path through the report to build good navigation. So a couple last things here. Provide anchors to navigate from the summary to more detailed information or to return back to the summary. Provide links, next and previous pages, to the report archive, to references. You should have explanations of data, maybe perhaps a glossary of technical terms somewhere in this report. And avoid links between reports. I know that happens a lot, but a good report should be so targeted that the users do not need to navigate elsewhere to get a complete picture of that data. So forcing users to navigate between reports can lead to usability issues, and it could also lead to just interoperability issues, compatibility issues. There can be a lot of things that happen. It becomes a maintenance effort down the road. So some key best practices here on navigating the report. Distribution, and this is where we'll talk about our final area of the reporting life cycle, and then we'll move off into stating a challenge or a couple of challenges. Ensuring that the report is transportable is obviously it's key in this whole process. It goes without saying. The three main methods of distribution are email, web hosting, and printing. So with regards to email, ensure that the component allows users to send reports by email. So if a user is using a report, perhaps there's an option in that report to email. That's always a good touch. The report should be short enough to be displayed well within an email message. So if this is being intended to be received and viewed within an email, keep that in mind. Summary should be at the very beginning, visible without having the user to scroll. And it should have very few, if any, graphics, because again, it's in an email. So sometimes you can disable graphics as well, or sometimes email systems will do that. So if your email report is highly dependent on graphics, perhaps there may be some limitations for that user when they view it. So again, keep that in mind. Graphics only when they're necessary, and if you use them, keep them small. Same thing for charts. There should be an option for generating an HTML or plain text email report, again, according to your user's requirements. And links, as far as links to the full report, the email itself should just have a summary, a user-requested section, so what the requirements are, and sections that are highlighted in the summary report. But if there's anything in the full report, link off to it from that email. If you move to a web-hosted type of report, again, an option for exporting to HTML or another appropriate format. Talk with your end users. Allow users to export directly to a web server. So we see a lot of that functionality that happens with SharePoint these days. Allow users to define a naming algorithm so a series of reports can be generated. There's a lot of reporting user interfaces have what's called the suffix and prefix property that can be attached to any report you save. So that may be something that you can add. And allow users to access archived reports to export them as needed. So current reports, but there should also be perhaps a listing of archived reports perhaps if someone wants to look at things historically. And a quick bit on printing. Would this work on paper? So when you're actually developing a report, ensure that the same information is included in all formats. So don't include information in one printable format and not in the other. It should be consistent across the board. And again, with regards to working on paper, just make sure that you're following the guidelines set forth by your organization, whether it's 8.5 by 11, perhaps there's a long report format that you guys have standardized on, but work within that. And again, going back to color coding, colors alone should not contain any information because more times than not, people are going to be printing in black and white. So keep that in mind. So as you can see, these these key areas that we've gone through can all incorporate best practices. We've discussed a few of them today. Perhaps some of these may add value in your practices moving forward. But I think that a lot of us will agree on these. Now, a data analyst or a business analyst world is not without challenges. And ultimately, this is what I feel are the main challenges that a data analyst or a business analyst actually faces. We've talked about this early on, but requirements, understanding the true stakeholders' needs or the stakeholders' true needs is really key in this. Unless you know that the stakeholders' true needs, any of these other aspects of the reporting lifecycle are going to be for naught. Mining, digging through vast quantities of data to find the required information. You could almost say that this is somewhat intertwined with query design, because to mine data, you may be using the SQL language to extract that needed data. But it is a very tough task. It's complicated, and we're also dealing with several platforms. So that always makes it tough, just trying to get the right data to solve the right questions. Functionality. You can see here, making the report flexible and feature-rich for the user while remaining concise and well-organized. So our functional consideration is a big challenge for you as a business analyst. Formatting. Giving stakeholders the data they need in an actionable format could be complicated. And there are a number of different formats. There's the eye of the beholder that you have to take into consideration. And then finally, distribution, getting the reports to the end user in a timely manner and in the right location. Some of this distribution can indeed be manual, so not only do you want automation in this process, but you want it to be something that's very, let's say, ubiquitous, so something that can distribute to a lot of different types of mediums. So what I'd like to do now is take a poll question. Let me move over here to the next slide. Which of the following do you find the most challenging? Let me go ahead and put this poll question up. So which of these do you find most challenging as a business analyst? Is it A, requirements, B, mining, query design? Is it C, functional considerations? Is it D, information design or formatting? Or is it E, the distribution? Now, I could have added a letter F there and said, write in your own answer. I'd be interested to see what other folks have to say. But hopefully these 5 challenges kind of cover the spectrum pretty well. Now, while I'm looking at the amount of votes that have come in, so far 60% have come in, and I would say the majority of the group consider requirements to be the biggest challenge, and I am not surprised. Query design and mining seems to be the second most, the second biggest challenge, or a challenge that the second majority, I would say, 26% of the group here feels. So we'll just give another moment or so, but you'll also see here that third on the list was information design and formatting as well. All right. Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate you guys participating in this poll. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll at this moment. Give it in just another moment or so. Let a couple more votes trickle in. All right. Let's go ahead and close this poll. But it looks like 51% of the folks on this audience feel that requirements is the biggest challenge. 27% mining, query design. 12% information design, formatting. Really appreciate your guys' feedback there. And there are the poll results. You guys can go ahead and have a look. So when we look at the world of querying and reporting and we talk about software solutions, ask yourself, what if your querying and reporting solution could enable productivity by automating tasks and processes that add value for accessing the database, so you can connect to any relational database. Investigation, browse and query across the RDBMS, bringing data together from different sources. And delivery, providing reports and information to support business requirements. Well, what's interesting is that Quest indeed does have a solution that fits in this space. Perhaps you guys have used this before. It's called Toad for Data Analysts, and it supports business and IT objectives by providing data professionals with unprecedented data access, investigation, and delivery. The core tenets of Toad for Data Analysts are access, investigation, delivery, and productivity. And it's built specifically for data professionals for querying and reporting on data from any source to various formats, including Excel, and it allows you to compare data between databases and DBMS platforms. So what I'd like to do now is spend a few moments taking through a few vignettes within the Toad for Data Analyst solution. This should take probably 5 minutes at the most, and then we'll open up for some Q&A. So what we'll do here is we'll flip over into the demo here in a moment, but these are the things that I wanted to show you within Toad for Data Analysts. Project management, organizing data-driven tasks, and collaborate with teammates using common techniques. This solution will enable that. Data assembly, streamlining the process of gathering data from different sources and platforms. What if you wanted to join data between 2 different database types? Script development, using templates that can be reused to speed the query building in reporting or the scripting that's involved in reporting. And have a library of templates that can make it easier for you to do these tasks later on. Share with other users. Data comparison, identify and validate differences through data comparison. We'll work through an example there. And then finally, report management. Not only managing the different reports that you have in your arsenal, but then automating and seamlessly distributing these to the constituents. So what we'll do here is we'll go ahead and flip over into Toad for Data Analysts. Now, as you can see here, I have quite a few windows staged. So what we'll do is we will go right over to the beginning. I'm gonna whip open one of these windows for us. Actually, I already have it open here. By the way, you'll notice here, this is our Toad World website. I'll talk about this in a moment, but this is where you can go to interact with the community of Toad users around the world, depending on a specific domain. But as you can see here over on the left-hand side, I have a project manager. Now, what the project manager does in Toad for Data Analysts, it allows me to organize my work as an analyst. So I may have different dimensions of meaningful items that are enabling me through my reporting workflow. Things like scripts, things like web resources, database objects, collections of scripts. You may want to have a task list embedded within this. So when you start to look at this, this project, this will contain all your essentials. So Excel files, data reports. You may have a to-do list that you're keeping track of. And then within this project itself, there may be certain distribution methods that you're looking to explore. So you'll have your automation scripts saved. The different objects that you query within the database for this particular project can be canistered within this. So you see how all of my order entry and my access data is now available here in this project without having to browse the database again. And you'll also see here that other connections and web resources, FTP server, I have access to support link here at Quest. There may be a company intranet. All of these things here are going to help you collaborate. And you can share these projects with other users. So if you want to make a baseline project for something that you're about to work on, this may contain the essentials for that business analyst. So you can save your project as a file and share it with other users. Also, this is a pretty cool tool within the Toad solution. I'm going to go to minimize this for a second and just close down the web browser that I had open. But check this out. Over on the left, there's a collaboration screen. Now, I know a lot of you folks may be using RSS feeds. You may have something internally that works off of RSS. We also have a Twitter community. Well, we have a Twitter, or this links with Twitter. And there is a Toad for Data Analysts has its own Twitter page. And there's also an R&D page, or kind of like a portal, and we call this our idea pond, and this also interacts with that. So what you're seeing here are all the messages coming in and out of the idea pond. So when I set up this collaboration here, you could set it to work with different RSS feeds, idea pond, something on Twitter, and what happens is when new messages come in, this one just came in at 9:41 a.m. And if I double click on it, I can now read directly what's going on in the community. And you can see here that we have several folks from Quest R&D answering questions. Debbie Peabody, for instance, is one of those. So this is more for collaboration with the entire community of TDA users, or Code for Data Analyst users, but this can be certainly set up to work within your own internal environment as well. So you can compose, for instance, a message if you need to. I'm going to close that down. I'm going to close down this browser here. So take you through a couple of other things here. Let me flip back to the PowerPoint slide so I have a reference. Data assembly, gathering data from different sources. So I have an example baked here. If we go up to our window menu and we scroll down to our query builder, what I've done here is I've basically taken a table from Access and a table from Oracle, and I've joined them together. So in this solution, one of the unique capabilities that we offer users, business analysts, is they can drag data from different resources. So you can see here in my navigation manager, I have a connection to Access, Oracle. I even created a connection to an Excel spreadsheet. I can then join data across these different sources to determine what could be the problem with the data, what's going on with the data, is this the data I'm looking for? You can see here columns 1 and column 3 are coming from Access, columns 2 and column 4 are coming from Oracle. And what's interesting here is that when you go through this process of looking at data, sometimes you may want to compare it without the use of a cross-platform query. So another approach would be to use our compare tool. We allow you to compare data across different databases or database platforms. In this particular use case, I compared the same tables that I had in those queries. And you can see here that it picked up, let's see here, 93 that are in Access. So there are 93 records in Access that don't appear in Oracle. There are 52 that appear in Oracle that don't appear in Access, and there are 7 common records. And if I just focus on the common data points or the common customer IDs, we could also discuss and view their differences as well. So when you're in a mining task, or perhaps you're in a task of looking for the right data, sometimes having the comparison is useful, not only to identify things, but certainly you may want to synchronize. A big process of a data analyst's job is to merge or to move data together. So I can now move this data from Access into Oracle if I need to, with the use of an update command and an insert command that's fully constructed by TDA. I'm going to go ahead and close this. Let's go back to our slide here real quick. Script development, creating template scripts that can be used and reused to speed the background in reporting. So if I go up here into my window and I open up my editor, actually this is not the one I wanted. Let's go here. You can see here that we have a great scripting interface. One of the nice things about this window is that you know, it's multifaceted, so you can work with programming languages as well as just scripting languages or like SQL. And when you press the Control and Space bar, we give you access to a wide array of code templates. So if you're an analyst looking to incorporate an analytic function, you can go and drag that right into your editor screen when you need to. Plus, analysts can begin to document and store their own favorite code here in a favorite section. So you can see here, I can now begin to add my own snippets, my own folders of code that I can now access through the Control Space hotkey or to literally drag and drop into my editor. And you'll also see it's color-coded. We have formatting tools built in. So you can do a short format, a long format. You could set the formatting criteria if you need to. This is going to conform it to a standard. And then down below you have your execution plan, depending on the database that you're working with. Of course, you could right-click here and change this to a plain language plan if you are not a SQL expert. Also, if we go back to our slide, just a couple more minutes here, and we're pretty much up and right into our Q&A. We talked about data comparison. I wanted to talk a little bit about report design, management, and distribution. So as you can see here, I've pre-staged quite a few reports here. And I wanted to talk about things like conditional formatting and pivot tables, things like that. Here's a preview of a report that I've been designing. So this is a customer orders report. Now, if I want to get to the design of this report, I could simply click here. This will take me to the design of this report. Let me close the code snippets. So it works a lot like anything else you've seen out there. These are all the data fields that are coming from the database. The properties here control things. So an example is if I want to add a conditional rule to any one of these items. So let's say I want to add a conditional rule here on retail price. What I can do here is go over to the bottom right, click on formatting rule, edit the rules sheet, and now add a condition. And you see here, I can write a regular expression that determines whether this field changes color, what happens to it when the condition actually changes. So that's something I wanted to show you here in the design tool, and you could always get to the derived query just by clicking here. So you could work from the format right back to the query itself. As far as pivoting is concerned, if you go up here, I have another query builder open. Now here's an example where I queried the entire order and the orders table. But what I wanted to do was produce something for our sales team that they could use. So when I go over here to my results, all the data is queried back. It's really hard to look at this in a flat way. But what I wanted to do was create a pivot that shows my sales team the total order revenue broken down by rep, broken down by order date. So you can see how easy that was to produce using your pivot chart. And then I can then go up here and decide as to how I want to filter this data. Do I want to look at only direct sales or online sales? So all of these reporting activities that I've just performed can now be sent into automation if I need to. And what automation looks like is right up here. You'll see here that when you create your report will appear in the automation script. It's going to derive off of a connection, which comes from your database, and then you can choose what type of activities you want to perform. So do you want the file to be copied from here, your local file system, to a SharePoint? Our actual Siebel team, we have a bunch of analysts that support our Salesforce. They actually will copy from their local PC to a SharePoint directory and using this automation script. Otherwise, you could set an email, you could set it to FTP, you can run further actions, you could set parallel tasks. So if I test this to run, what you'll see is in about a moment or two, an actual file will be created on my desktop. So it's creating a PDF for me. And now I can go over here into my reports folder, and you can see because of the suffix feature, I was able to generate this PDF. And now I have my report. Submit it. So I did promise that I want to leave a little bit of time for some Q&A. So what we're going to do now is flip over into a quick value statement, and then we'll open up for some Q&A. Just wanted to read this verbatim. According to the University of Alaska, much of the excitement for the tool stems from the fact that all users, regardless of experience with SQL, can now write well-formed queries as well as connect to multiple database instances, easily view and understand the data, and share queries and reports, all the while exporting to Excel. I know I didn't read it verbatim, but you guys can forgive me there. And then you'll see here that this is Toad World. So I showed you a graphic of that earlier within Toad for Data Analysts, but anytime you have a query here, let's say I'm looking for reports, just put the search term in the box there, and it'll actually take you right to Toad World and allow you to look at some of the topics that pertain to that: blogs, tutorials, articles, you name it. All right. So what I'd like to do now is first thank you all for your time and attention today, and I'd like to open up the forum for some questions and comments from the pool of audience. So let's go ahead and start a Q&A session here for the next 5 minutes or so. And what we'll see here is, let me see some of the questions that have been asked. Bear with me. Oh, so they want a description between the union and union all. So the big difference between the union and the union all is the use of distinct. So if you know that your data is going to have duplicate data in it, so a lot of times we do analysis based on asset reports that we'll receive, and a lot of times we need to look at footprints of installs based on a machine. So we're always going to have a lot of duplicate entries there. So in those cases, I will use union because I know that the operation the database performs, the select distinct on the final result set is going to be handy. So when to use union, when you know you have duplicate data and you know that you want that final result set to be filtered down to only distinct values. Union all dismisses the use of distinct altogether. So if you know that your data does not contain any duplicate records, that's going to be a good approach to take because you're not wasting your time running a distinct because you know that the data has no duplicates. So hopefully that answers your question there, Phil. I believe that this is being recorded, so I believe Iyer asked this question about being able to get access to this because you missed a couple parts of the presentation. So this will be definitely available on the Modern Analyst page. Do you have a learning and notification capability built into the reporting? Well, not so much into the reporting, but built into our automation. So when you create an automation script, let me go back to it here. One of the things you can do is you can have an email sent as part of this. So maybe I create a parallel process right in between here. So when I copy the file, in parallel with that, I also have an email sent. So I'm hoping that answers your question, and that question came from Pradeep. Do you have a wizard for writing the where clause? This one came from Donald. Absolutely. If you go back here into the query builder, so here's where I queried this data. Let's just go to this one, order entry. But if I go back here under diagram, let's say I want to put a where clause on one of these items. Let's say I want to put a where clause on, let's do a where clause on order date. So we're looking for a range of dates, right? So what I can do here is click on the box that corresponds to the column that corresponds to the where condition. Click on the ellipsis button, and then you can add your where clause here. So you can choose a bunch of operators here, or you can pull through a range of dates. So what I'll do here is I'll select between, and then what I'll do here is I will choose 2 dates that are in my list. This is really interesting because what this is doing is it's showing you the actual distinct values that appear in that column. So be careful when using that. Otherwise, Toad will prompt you for that. But now that I accept this to the query, you now see the where clause has been written. So hopefully that answers your question, Donald. Thank you. Will a copy of this presentation be sent? Kent, yes, this definitely will. Where can I get information for the pricing for your software? I think your best bet is to go to quest.com or just email me, and I will pass along some more information to you. And the Toad Role application is definitely free to try. There was a question regarding that. One question came, I have time for probably one more question here. One question came from, looks from Nuruddin. Can you please comment on how often organizations move towards using tools such as Toad for Data Analysts? From what I hear, a lot of companies still insist on their employees using Excel for data analysis. Well, yeah, I agree with you that the first insistence will always be something within Microsoft Office, but I'll tell you that when you look at the number of platforms you're managing, if you have more than one platform, the need or the commensurate need for Toad for Data Analysts increases. Because you saw the capabilities of working with multiple platforms, keeping the learning curve very reduced against all of them. So you're not working in separate tools. You're backed by a community of users. So there's some standards that we're creating around TDA. So I would say that those are some of the motivating factors. Another thing is it's quite attractive with TDA because a lot of our Toad for Oracle users, so people that purchase Toad for Oracle, they're getting to use this solution right out of the box. It comes kind of freely equipped with it. So I guess those are a couple of ways that I can answer that. But if you send me an email offline, I'll certainly get to your questions in more detail. Yes, there's a question regarding the automated reports based on a trigger of some sorts. This will be the last question that I take, and then what I'll do is I can answer the rest of them offline. Bear with me here. But you'll notice in the automate screen, you could see here there's an if condition that you can add. You could set a variable. You could even loop the data set. But the if condition is going to take care of that. It's going to look at a certain condition before it actually generates this automation. So what I'll do is, if there are any other questions, we can go ahead and look at those archive, and I can get back to you offline. I definitely want to thank everybody for their time and attention today. And again, thank you on behalf of Quest Software and Modern Analyst. My name is Amit Parikh, and my email address is stated there on the slide, amit.parikh@quest.com. And all the best with your future use of Modern Analyst, but also your future evaluation of Quest products. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, Amit, for a very informative presentation, and of course, thank you to everyone for joining today's Modern Analyst webinar. I wanted again to reiterate that the webinar, along with the slides, will be archived at ModernAnalyst.com within a day or two of the event. This concludes today's webinar, and we hope you have a great day.